What's up YouTube, and welcome back to another Procreate tutorial where today I've got a postbox design for you. You've got to make sure you get your letters sent off to Santa nice and early and in time. Now, as you'll be able to see, this is a British postbox design. It's actually based off of the postbox in my village, and I saw it and it gave me some inspiration for today's tutorial. And everything that you see in today's tutorial is built into Procreate, so you won't need any additional brushes or anything like that. The only thing you will need is the canvas size and the palette, and they're both available over on my Patreon. There's a link to it in the description down below, and the requirements are completely free. And while you're over on my Patreon, check it out, because I've got over 120 exclusive tutorials to my patrons, and the catalogue continues to grow every single month because I give them 3 new tutorials every single month. If you're interested in all of those tutorial designs, you can go to my website and see every single one of them before you join, and that way you know if the content is fit for you. But you can do me a solid here and subscribe to the channel and help grow the channel. So hit the subscribe button down below. Enjoy today's tutorial and let's get started. So once you've created your canvas, the first thing we're going to do is go up to our actions, as always, the canvas tab, and we're going to add a drawing guide. We're going to edit that drawing guide and we're going to set it to a grid size of 1/4 of your canvas. So for me it's 500. I'll hit done. I'll bring the opacity up to 50% and we will go ahead and I'll just set it to a bright-ish color that we can see. So maybe it's like a pinky white tone here, and hit done. Now obviously at the minute we're not going to be able to see what we're doing, but once we set the background in play we will. So let's go ahead and start making some shapes. So let's first of all go ahead and create another new layer and swipe from left to right here and group these 2 layers together. We're going to rename that group and we're going to call it BG. So we're going to collapse that down, usually just for background. And then this empty layer here in the group, we'll go to our colors. We'll grab the color in the bottom right of the palette, drag it onto the screen. Then we'll go to the layer above. We'll go to our colors and grab the middle of the far right column. Your brush wants to be set to airbrushing and the soft brush. And we've set the size, or opacity, sorry, to max. Size set to something that around about, say, 20%. And we just need to create a bit of a background kind of gradient in the top right corner. You could probably go a little bit bigger than that, mainly in the top half of the design. You don't need to go any lower. It's just making sure that the very top edges are a bit dark. I urge you to honestly keep this layer if possible right towards the end, because you may want to sort of change where the lighting is and just to tweak it. But at the end of the day, it's only one layer. If you do flatten it together, it's not the end of the world. So a little kind of gradient like this, we definitely probably want to start thinking about bringing this down a little bit more in terms of the color, but just a little something in the sky to start with. Now let's go ahead and start making some basic shapes. So we're going to go to our layers. We're going to collapse the BG down. We're going to create a new layer. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab the color on the top of the 5th column. We're going to go to our selection tool. We're going to use the option of rectangle, and you do want color fill turned on like this. You want it nice and blue so it's active. We want to go ahead and use our drawing grid here as a bit of a guide. You can always tweak this because at the end of the day it's just a rectangle, but something roughly around about height wise, say here, and create a bit of a symmetrical kind of rectangle in the center of your screen. So a little something like this. In fact, I'm going to make mine a bit narrower and just know that I'm going to grab my cursor. I'm going to move it across into the center. If you want to make sure it's actually centered, go to snapping and turn on snapping here in the bottom left, and you'll get that orange line through the middle of it. Just lets you know it's nice and central. And using freeform, you can make it wider or taller. I think, to be honest, that's looking pretty good, maybe a tiny bit narrower. And I think, in fact, about there. So I'm going to pop that in the center. By the way, if you're interested, the width of mine is 633 by 1363. I'm going to tap on my cursor when I'm done. We're going to carry on again making basic shapes. So we're going to go to the BG again, create another new layer. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to grab this color here, top left of the palette. We're going to go back to our brush. We're going to go to the option of calligraphy, and we are going to use the monoline brush. We're going to have the size set to something quite small, because what we need to do is we actually just need to create some basic rock shapes. So I'm going to start off with like a 3%. That looks pretty fine to me. Now, roughly here is the halfway point of our design. That's roughly where we want to start laying in our rocky wall. And you just want to create the idea of like, let's create some rocky kind of boulder shapes, just a little something like that, and then start overlapping them potentially. So you create like all the stones in the kind of wall here. So very sort of British countryside kind of wall here, nice big sort of stony shapes in here. And then we can maybe have like a little avenue there where we maybe jump up and create a new rock over there. Just as something as simple as that. The only thing you want to make sure you do is just drag your line here through the shape to the opposite side so you can just see it poke its head out and make it life easier in a minute. So something like that. And then on the opposite side, just do exactly the same. Try and make it a little bit different. Maybe try and sort of stay above the line at this point. So maybe try and create some like rocky, bouldery, again, shapes in here, a little something like this. And then maybe upwards into like a new kind of rocky shape there. And then we'll go ahead and just create more interesting kind of shapes. We're going to layer snow on top anyway, but it's just for our brick or rock wall. Now, because we drew a line through side to side, we can drag and drop the color into this bottom area, then tap on continue filling and just tap and fill in any little gaps in case you need to. Let's carry on making some more basic shapes. So we're just going to go to our layers. This block here that we created, we're going to swipe it to the left and duplicate it. The top one out of the two, go to your color, grab the red at the top of the fourth column and drag it into the space. Then grab your cursor, use freeform, and now we can just simply use this shape again, just making it a bit smaller to make our actual post box. So you want to leave gaps on either side so that we've got our brickwork, and then we can bring that down as well. So a little something like that. That to me is already looking pretty good in terms of positioning. I think maybe a tad higher, and we can see it on the grid system, sort of roughly whereabouts it is. Now, if you're interested again in dimensions, there they are for you, 428 by 889. And then I'll tap on my cursor when I'm done. And then we've got our post box. So let's go ahead and continue some shapes around that. So I'm going to tap on the wall that we created and create a new layer. I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to go ahead and grab this tone here. It is the top of the fourth column from the right. And we're going to create some diagonal lines somewhat off of this corner, but you're going to start a bit lower. So you're going to start here, draw in a line and hold your pen down, then pop a finger on the screen and you'll get this kind of snap. We want that 45-degree kind of angle here. So I'm going to bring it up to around about, say, there, and then just basically draw a line all the way across and pop one finger on the screen just until it pokes its head out of the side there. There you go. So that's your sort of point that you know, because you drew a line perfectly across, that's roughly where it should be in terms of sort of parallel to that. So I can draw it in again, pop one finger on the screen to get that nice straight line, and then I can just link them two up by drawing a line across the top, linking them together. Potentially you may have to just get in there and just link them, and that's fine. You may also want to just not make it too perfect, so just run your pen down it with just a minor amount of tremor or wobble in there, just to sort of break down that sort of straight line. This line here, don't worry about it, we can change that in a second. So we'll drag and drop the color in, and we're creating the top sort of surface here. We're going to go ahead and create another new layer. It's going to go in front of the last one we were working on, and we're going to go to our colors. We'll grab the white tone here in the middle of that fourth column from the right, just to start with. And again, we're going to go ahead and create the top surface. So we're just going to draw in a bit of a diagonal line here. Now you want it not at the 45-degree angle, but a little bit more upright like here, just up and over the top there. So I'm going to start here, draw it up just a tiny bit over the top. One finger is on the screen in the bottom left there. And then again at the bottom, I urge you to draw it in if you can. I want this stone top here to not be perfect. And likewise, I don't want it to be perfect over the top anyway. As long as you create a somewhat straight line, you're good to go. Again, there's going to be snow on it anyway. And drag and drop your coloring. And then you should have your rocky top to it as well. So we've got all of the basic shapes in play now. We can actually start to work on all of them individually. Now, before we carry on, I want to go to this layer here, which is the dark block. I want to go ahead and tap on it and add a mask to it. Now, making sure you're on this layer, your color is set to black at the bottom of the disk. You can double tap at the bottom of the disk to select black. If you go to your brush, make sure it's the monoline again and bring that size right down to like a 1%. We're just going to draw in some bricks. So we're going to follow the line down and then occasionally just a little dip in. And I want you to just sort of mark in a few sort of cut-ins here. They're the gaps in the bricks. That's where the grout is in between, or the cement even, and just sort of coming down, creating the kind of blocks in there. Zoom all the way out and just triple check you're happy with the size. I wouldn't make them too small either. I would keep them fairly large. You don't want them sort of making it look like they're tiny little sort of slate small gaps almost. So a few small ones towards the top, that's fine. It doesn't need to be perfect in any way. We're just making little cut-ins all the way down our little post box here, all the way down. And you can kind of stop once you get down to here. And then you can always set your color back to white by double tapping in the top left. And you can zoom back in And say, for instance, I've made too many here, I can just draw it back in. White reveals, remember, so I can go ahead and draw all of that back in with white, switch my color back to black, and redo it based off of maybe the ones I did a little bit lower. So there's a little bit of a cut in, and then a bit of a bigger gap now between them. And again, don't forget, you can always go back to white so that you can maybe just chisel into those gaps a bit more and just make them a little less bulky. You can make them a little bit smaller. So like I've got a really big break there, that's fine. But I just want to sort of make sure that the gaps aren't too heavy and too big, you know, in between. They can be. Either way is perfectly fine, but that's something to work on. And likewise, down here, I could probably do with maybe bulking out the bottom one. It's fine to slip in like that, but there we go. Now I'm going to set it to black and just simply do exactly the same on the opposite side. Now some of those on that left-hand side I've left, and I've basically just tried to parallel, sort of draw in a gap. So you'll just need to do that in your own work, but I've basically left a few of them a bit sort of more cut in, just to give me a little bit more sort of definition between the blocks. But it's definitely something you can come back to because we've got the mask. Now we're going to start detailing, and the first thing we're going to detail is the back wall. So we're going to go to our layers. We're going to go to the wall here. We're going to create a new layer, swipe from left to right on both, group them together, and we'll just call this group wall. As always, I like to name my groups and just keep things nice and organized. Now we're going to tap on this layer. We're going to clipping mask it to the main shape. We're going to go to our colors and notice we've got two more tones in the same column for this area. We're going to go ahead and start adding in all of these tones. So I'm going to start off first of all with the light tone, the middle of that first column. We're going to go to our brush. We're going to go ahead and set it to the option of, we want the option of materials and we want the Glover brush. We're going to set the opacity to 59% and the size, we want to start off a little bit larger than that. I think around about 4%. We just want to block things in to start with. So keep this really simple. We've got a low opacity so we can layer on top the color multiple times. So around about 3 to 4%. Brighten up some of the top surfaces of some of the rocks. This is not somewhat based on lighting just yet. At the minute, I just want to identify all of the kind of bricks and rocks in this wall. And I honestly want you just to keep it super, super random at this point. Patch it in. Don't forget you've got a low opacity, so you can just create all of the lovely countryside wall, brick walls that we have here in the UK. And you can just patch them in, just create in blocks. You don't want to make them too perfect, and they do not need to all be the same shape either. You can bring your brush size down if you want to like a 2%, so you're in more control. And don't forget, you are at a low opacity, so you can get back in there if you want to, and kind of an occasional randomness on top of some of those blocks, make them a little bit more brighter, a little bit more colorful. Just something simple like this, and then keep going. But towards the bottom, to be honest, you don't need to stress about the bottom of the wall, if I'm honest, because we will just have that all covered up anyway. We'll do the same, of course, on both sides. So just looking to sort of brighten up kind of maybe a top surface of a block or something like that. Again, they don't need to be perfect sort of bricks kind of shapes. They're not brick shapes. I'll show you on screen that this was actually based off of a photograph from the village that I live in, and the wall you'll be able to see, none of the bricks or blocks are actually perfect in any way at all. The only thing you want to now do on yours is just kind of take a look at both sides and see if you can make it kind of resemble the opposite side. This side over here, I'm going to actually redo in a second because I prefer the aesthetic of this one over here. This one over here, I used a much larger brush size and didn't add in quite so many of the small ones. However, you can maybe try and marry that up by adding in some smaller ones in between potentially, and then seeing if the two sides kind of match in an aesthetic. Blocking it in. I've got a few small areas towards the top and I like that. I could definitely probably get in there and break them down or even cluster them together potentially. But overall, we want this kind of random aesthetic to it. We're going to go back in with our colors now and grab the bottom of the first column. We're going to have the exact same process, except you're going to try and now integrate some areas of shadow. So for example, we're just going to very quickly and loosely look for where those blocks are, probably at like a 2 to 3% now, I would imagine. And we're just going to try and just run our pen through some of the gaps to create like little sort of chisel lines, little bits of where the cement was to stick it all together if any was used. But also we want randomness to it. I will probably bring my opacity down to like a 37% now as well, because I don't want to go too dark too early with the dark grooves. I want to really build up a lot of tone in here, cut through some rocks. They don't need to be perfect. They do not want to have like a perfect shape to them in any way. You can cut right through, and you're trying to imagine all of the grooves in between them all. Towards the top, they wouldn't have quite so many gaps in between. They would be quite large shapes, but already a little bit of extra contrast and darkness in there. You can bring it down to like a 2% now and really start to just groove in lots of small areas of detail, little areas of darkness in between all of those little brick-like shapes. So just look for some of the light areas that you created, and then the underside of them, try and just block in some color. So you leave, like here, I've got a perfect little kind of brick-like shape, and I'm just kind of detailing underneath it, grooving it between, because then you end up with this contrast, and then next to the brick beside it, you end up with a dark groove, and then this almost looks like it's protruding out of the wall a little bit more, giving us some extra level of detail and contrast and sort of just randomness to these beautiful walls that we have. So we're just keeping carrying on. And I really want you to also just really try and experiment by just running in little random, look at this, just random little sort of dashes all over the place. Make that wall uneven, make it messy, make it complete random in terms of destruction and kind of different application of color. We've of course got to do exactly the same process on the opposite side. So let's keep that brush size opacity, about 35%, and grooving in between all of those nice tones. We can always go back to our base tone as well, the color that sits underneath that we are clipped to, and add in some new color tones in here using that kind of more browny tone. These ones that we're introducing now are quite light and dark, and they're quite obvious and separated from one another. But at this point, we just want to make sure that there's lots and lots of groove and detail, because of course when we put our greenery on top of here shortly, we are going to lose a little bit of this. So we just want to see if it's there. We just want to have a little something under the surface of all of our greenery, and just to show and expose the texture in the rock. I'm going to set the brush size to around about sort of 8 to 9%, and just in the bottom right and left in a second, I'm going to just lightly start to build up some dark tone. So I'm just building up with a curved kind of nature to it, the bottom left area, because we're not interested in bringing the lighting too far down the design. I want to keep it quite towards the top. So that's kind of a critical stage at this point. You may want to bring your opacity up to like 55% and just definitely make sure that the corners are nice and dark, but they've still got that texture, so you might actually allude to the fact there's still something there. So I'm going to start making the brush size even smaller, around about say like a 2%, and just try and again put lots of dashes and lines and grooves and cuts and grout and just everything in between and dirt and whatever it may be. 1 or 2%. You can get really, really small with it. You can go across a brick if you want to, or block. I know I keep saying brick and block. They're blocks really, but just I'm in flow state in a way. I'm trying to draw and commentate in a sense, so it happens sometimes. Cut through there. Maybe I need to separate those a little bit more, a couple more dashes in between, and then bring the opacity up to like a 3% and just shadow down here, just beside our post box. So just shadow in there, darkening that up. Likewise on this side, darkening that up, giving a nice bit of separation there. And again, I've got to do exactly the same as I've been doing over there, over here. So 2%, and I'm just going through it like crazy now, just trying to really boost up the contrast in between all these little gaps in the wall, really show the grooves of the wall. So a lot of people always ask me, they say, where do you get your ideas from? And this is just generally one of those ones that just comes about while I'm walking the dogs, and just saw the post box and just thought, you know what, actually that would make a really cool design. I wonder if I can do something with that. The time of year works perfectly. The concept for today is to make sure you get your letters to Santa in time. And I thought, well, actually, time of year and everything around that would actually work out nicely for YouTube. So I thought that works nicely. But you can take ideas from just seeing things out and about. And I know that's a bit of a tricky thing sometimes to actually think about is, well, what should I be looking for? But once you're constantly thinking about what drawing, and it's part of your routine to do so, it will actually become like a bit of a second nature. You'll be looking at trees, for example, and think, actually, those colours, look at the difference in those colours now and how they've changed throughout the season. And all of that kind of thought process will come to you. It just takes a little bit of time to sort of really engulf yourself in that world. Now, the only thing I want to do is just quickly go back to the middle tone in the first column. I want to bring the brush size down to like a 1 to 2%, and I want to just get in on top of those rocky edges and just add in little scuffs and dashes all over the place, because your dark tones now might have actually taken away too much, and that's fine. We want to kind of have that process of, you know, really building up the color and the contrast, and then you can always go back in really random. Look at that, random little scrapes. You can make it even smaller. I kind of wish this brush was pressure sensitive at times, just to make sure that you can really apply it quite randomly, but a 1 to 2% will do the trick. And just get in there, a couple of dashes on some of your blocks there. Let's just bring that down. A couple of little scuffs in there. Awesome. Let's do the same on this side. Of course, we've got double the work to do because we've got both sides, but you want the wall to be different on both sides, so we don't want to use like a symmetry tool. You could do a symmetry tool, but you want the wall ideally to look different, have a little bit more character on both sides. So random scrapes on the sort of, I'm looking for, if I've got a block, say here, I'm looking to create like a little bit of color on the top edge and maybe a little bit of protruding kind of white tone in the rock. So now we're going to go ahead and move into the greenery stage of this. So we're going to go ahead and go to our layers. We will create a new layer in the wall group. It doesn't necessarily need to be clipped at this stage. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab the dark green here at the top of the second column. Your brush wants to be changed to this brush here. So still in materials, it's just one up from where we were. It's this one here. I'll have zoomed in on it on the edit for you. And we're going to set the opacity to 61% to start with. And we want a fairly large-ish size, around about say 3% to start with. And we want to kind of patch in where we want our greenery to come in. So these are like vines, etc., that are grown on the rock. I'm going to set it to 2% because that 3 looked a bit too big. We've got a low opacity, so don't forget you can build it up on top. I want to show it growing in from the side, curling up and over the wall as well, and heading towards our post box. Lots of patches and taps, so you can drag if you want to, you can tap and scrape. If you tap a couple of times, don't forget, because we're set to a low opacity, you'll add in more green and more color, which is what we want. We want that lovely variation in our color of our greenery. You can run all the way across a brick or block. There we go. You don't have to necessarily just run it on the top edges or in the gaps. You can run it right over the top if you want to, and try and keep it as random as possible. Honestly, like the more random, the better. You can have an area such as here that has a little bit more green and really has consumed the wall, and then that will give you a nice big area to add some color to. I think I also want to go ahead and maybe set the brush size to about 2% and kind of run in a little bit towards the bottom, but also I want it quite close to my my post box. So a little bit there. I think I'll run a little bit up and onto that main rock there, but I definitely want something in these gaps. I want them in these gaps here to just have a little bit of green, because then it helps sort of wrap the greenery up and over the wall up onto the other side. Now I'd start off with less if you can, because what I think you should do is, especially in my practices, when I first did this, I did one layer of it and it looked great. I then redid it, and then I actually turned on the previous time I did it and the new time, and the two together looked great together. But I think it can be very quickly and easily overdone, so try not to do too much. Then on this side, try and do something a little bit different. Maybe up here, again, we'll go up to that 2 to 3% range. Maybe up here, I'm going to bring in the greenery from the side, and I will run it in like an avenue that runs all the way across, like a bit of a kind of growth that's like a bit of a vine almost, just running all the way towards the post box. And we're just going to run it all the way there, big chunk there, and then have it kind of fall down over the top of one of the rocks there, up and into here, up and off onto the side. So I'm going to leave this top area a little bit exposed to show some of my rock work. I set it to like a 3 or 4% because I can just tap away in certain areas just to add in the lightest amount of green. It doesn't need to be anything defined necessarily. Just a big patch of green down here, but light pressure in certain areas just to, you know, give it some randomness. And the two sides then have a very different set of characteristics. This one's quite dense, and in the gaps, I think the only thing I could do is kind of mirror the opposite side in a way where there's like quite a large area of green in one sort of space. But I want to keep them nice and random to each other, so a couple of little dashes like this. Let's then start moving into texture. And you can do it on a separate layer if you want to, or just do it on the same layer. I'm going to go to my brush. I'm going to go to the option of vintage. I'm going to use the rad brush. We're going to go to our color. We're going to set it to the bottom of the second column. I've got my opacity set to 60%. I've currently got the size, that marker is probably a bit too big, but we'll try our best around it, around about 6 to 5%. And then we're going to start adding in detail and lighting on here. So let's try the 8% that it was set to. And we're going to just run along our green areas. Random allocation though. I really want you just to sort of scribble. I really want you to scribble all over it and create random shapes in some certain areas. But what you'll do is you'll really start to bring this to life now. So I'm actually going to be even braver and go up to like a 10% and patch in this lighter tone, following the avenues and the root of all of our little green tones. I say the root, but I mean as in like the roots that they take in between my rocks and blocks here of my wall. So just adding in dashes on top. You're going to start to detail because this brush has quite a sort of defined shape to it. You can add in all the little color. You can even have like a tiny little bit that's not on top of the green necessarily, but it's just like creating a bit of a sort of link between these two areas. A little bit more towards the bottom. Again, in certain areas, I really urge you to kind of keep it quite minimal. Don't overdo it. Set the size to maybe 8% as well. Vary up the size so you've got some small areas of detail, because the smaller ones will look great because they'll look super sharp. They'll look like a really, really sharp piece of the sort of lighting landing on the green. And you should end up with this beautiful bit of texture up here. Have fun though, like sort of laying it out in just random spots. We have another color to introduce, so you can keep this going as long as you think you can all over your design. Don't forget, of course, we've got both sides to do, and we'll do the opposite side in just a moment because I want to do all of the same color at the same time. So random little bits of lighter green on top. I'm going to move across to this side and again do the same process. So I've got some good levels of detail here. We're then going to go ahead and add in some highlights, which is going to be the middle of the second column. Same brush, but we just want to make it a bit smaller this time now. So around about say 6%, and you can just get in there now and sort of sporadically, very sporadically, 6 to 7%, get in there and just add in some brighter tones on top. We are going to add snow on these as well. So in a minute, you're probably going to lose a few of these highlights. But again, it's just there just in case. It's like the wall, all the gaps in the wall that we created and all the grooves and dark tones, etc. We can see a few of them now, can't we, in between our gaps, but we do it anyway just in case it is visible, and that's exactly why. We want to make sure that we can see the detail should it actually sort of poke its head out. So I'm going to do the same on this side over here. You can see compared to the last set of color, we're keeping this a lot less in terms of quantity. You know, we're highlighting certain areas and creating variation in color. That's great, but we don't want to do too much. And you can set it even smaller if you want. You can go down to like a 5%, get really, really quite small and detailed with it. And again, add them in certain avenues if you can. Little sort of speckles here and there in the gaps will look lovely. A couple of little specks on the top there. And let's go down here too. Get a couple of little light tones in there. I don't want to have any sort of run too far. That one was a little bit too far a stretch from the actual green that I'd laid in place. And keep it random. You can have an occasional area that's got a nice random sort of large amount of color to it, but something like this is what we're going for. Now, before we carry on, I want to go ahead and go down a layer. I want to create a new layer for it and tap on it and clipping mask it to the wall. I want to go back to my colors and grab this color here, bottom left of the palette. And I want to go ahead and let's set our brush back to the previous one we were working on. So we want to go back into materials, and I'm going to go back to the Glover. I'm going to set the opacity kind of high, around about say 80 to 75%. Size wants to be around about 2 to 3. And I just need to zoom in here, and I just want to go ahead. In fact, 2 to 3 is probably too big, 1 to 2. Underneath some of your vines there, you can go ahead and darken them up. So add in like a bit of a shadow to the underside of them. So if there's a bright spot here, you can just darken up underneath it, creating like a bit of a drop shadow. You don't have to do it absolutely everywhere, and you can press quite firm in certain areas. You can even bring the opacity down if you want to sort of take your time building up a shadow, but a little bit in areas that you think in your design look like they could do with a little bit of an extra bit of definition, and it will just help it sit on the surface of those. So looking at the opposite side now, I'll do exactly the same. I'm going to get underneath some of those, just scribbling in very much so a little shadow. Look how quick and easy I'm trying to keep that. just quick and easy. Certain areas make your shadow quite dark and dense, but in other areas, leave it a little bit lighter. You don't have to darken it up absolutely everywhere. Just a little something underneath. Don't drag the shadow too low down either. You don't need to create like a really big drop shadow. Just a little something like that. Let's add some snow now to this whole design. So let's go ahead and go to our layers. In the wall again, create another new layer. Go to your colors and grab this color here, top of the second column from the right. We want to go to our brush. We want to go to airbrushing and the soft brush. And we want to set our size to something quite small and our opacity probably down to around about 70% too. Because let's go down to say 1 to 2%. The first thing we want to do is add some sort of foundational sort of snowy color to the top of here. Now you'll notice this color is not exactly snow, is it, Joel? It's quite a dark blue almost, a bit of purple tone in here. We are building up with a 1% the sort of base tone of our snow. We don't want snow to all just be solid white. It's so boring. You want to set it to different sizes, like a 1 to 2%, depending on where you are. Now start off with your rocks and just add in like a 2% and just like mound it up on the top surface of it and how you think the snow would lay on the blocks that you've created in your wall. Start off again with the top surfaces of those and, bring in little wobbles here across the rock. It doesn't have to sit just on the top surface. And this is again another reason why we did our block work on the rocks and created all the texture, which is a good lesson to learn anyway. But this now just allows us to sort of layer on new effect one after the other, leaves into snow. And some of it may not show going forward, but at least we did it. And just in case anything again is poking its head out. So we've got a little bit of sort of that tone on the top there. I'm going to move across and just carry on with the blocks for a minute. I want the blocks to have like a very light amount here and there of this blue tone on the top edges here. Now, I wouldn't overdo this necessarily because we've got more color to introduce in a second. It's just a little bit of foundational color on here. And also you can define the edge a little bit more if you want to, like make it a little bit softer and a little bit more wobbly if you want to with the soft airbrush. Because we're using the soft airbrush, we can layer on the color, but also we can feather out the edge as well, making it a little less sort of sharp because we use the monoline brush, of course. So a little bit of that blue over these gaps. Over on the right hand side, I'll chuck it in there, that's fine. And then I'm going to set the brush size to a smaller size, about 1%. I'm going to look for certain areas here in the rocks where maybe I can try and sort of just land a little bit of snow on here. So very, very light. That's what we want to try and create, a really light kind of little ledge, keeping your pressure nice and wobbly. And you don't have to do massive amounts. But certain areas here, you may be able to say, actually, I think a little bit of snow would fall on that. I think it would fall and land on that rock. I think it's got enough of a defined surface that I think we could get a little bit of snow on there. Don't have to do everywhere. You're just kind of looking for where it would marry up nicely. So a little bit on that ledge too. We're laying out our foundations for later on. And I think maybe I could go ahead and sort of add in a bit of a kind of path of this color here, wiggling it through, soft airbrush, really, really random, because the pressure is nice and light and the opacity is low. We can go ahead and really just take our time, just building up some snowy little ledges in there and grooves. That's cool. Now, one thing we also want to do is, before I move to the opposite side and do that, just in case you want to sort of pause me for a minute, you can go ahead now and start to wiggle your way through your green areas here, adding in fallen snow. Now, this isn't the final brush that we use for this. We're actually going to go back in with the rad brush, but with the white tones and the snowy tones. But now you can start to lay in some of the sort of snowy blue tone here in the greenery areas. Keep it nice and random. I really urge you to keep it nice and light as well. Like, don't overdo it. Keep it nicely sort of spaced out and don't overdo it. We're just adding in like a tiny bit of blue in certain areas just to add in a bit more color and kind of blend it all together. Blend all these things happening at the same time. We've got the green over the rocks. We've got the snow then landing on everything. So we can just take our time to just merge all these things together. And you can see there's not really much of a technique to it. I want my pen and my hand just to do random actions and scatter all over the place. Nature's so random. It's probably on your bingo card for one of my tutorials, but it's so random that we don't want to try and perfectly mimic it by creating purposeful lines sometimes. Sometimes I find it much easier to just scribble away because the brush has so much sort of pressure sensitivity, and my hand can do all sorts of gestures in terms of tremors and wobbles, and that can very much match up to real life's randomness. So we've got some areas there to start with. That's a little bit done on that side. We can move across back onto the opposite side and do exactly the same process. A couple of wobbles on top of some of these ledges here. You can really patch in an area as well if you think, actually, I think a good amount of snow would land on there. That's cool. You're just setting the foundation for in a minute when we get our snowy texture brush on top of here. And let's find some other areas, maybe a little bit on there too. I'm looking essentially for some of the brighter areas in my blocks that are nice and crispy almost, that I can say, actually, yeah, I think they stick out and protrude enough that I can chuck some snow on there. I'll chuck some snow down here even, just a little bit on this surface of this one here too. Zoom in out. I'm just varying the brush size occasionally from a 1 to 2%. A couple more wiggles and wobbles on there. Lovely. A couple in there too. And again, we just need to go back down to that 1% brush size now and just start adding in some snow in the leaves here. Again, random patches, dashes, scrapes, wobbles, tremors, all sorts of everything you can think of in here. Now, while I've got you, I don't know if you already know, but I've got a weekly show with the one and only James Julia. Both of us talk all things Procreate and digital art on our weekly show on YouTube. It's the Sketch Wave. You can come and join in with the conversation every week. We have guests on, we've had Flo, we've had Angry Miko, and we've got loads more planned. And you can come and join us for a weekly conversation. Again, that is the Sketch Wave, and it is on YouTube. I'll leave a link to it in the description down below. It's well worth you coming and joining in with us if you want to have us on in the background while you get away, sort of get through all your weekly chores, really. So anyway, enough promotion. Let's take a look at the rest of this. So I'm just wiggling my way, just continuing through here. And now I'm going to switch my brush. So I'm going to go ahead now and grab my new color, which is going to be the middle of the second column from the right. Let's go to our brush. Let's go back into the option of vintage and the rad brush. Again, we've still got the opacity set to 60%. The size probably wants to be around about sort of, I'd say 3 to 4, probably a maximum. We don't want massive flakes in here, do we? Let's keep the opacity low, and let's just now start building up on top. So we're going to make our way through all of the sort of light blue tone that we created a second ago, and now layer in, because of course the opacity is low, just layer in some snow. Now potentially this kind of aesthetic might be a bit too kind of flaky almost for you. If it is, maybe start with your soft airbrush, same color though, and start to patch in some of the snow but with a soft airbrush, or do both. It's totally up to you about sort of maybe a preferred aesthetic that you like more. I think a little bit of both looks fine. So I'm going to carry on with the soft airbrush just on the top of these rocks because they're quite large surfaces. So soft airbrush around about 1 to 2%, and I'm just going to wiggle my way through here, building up color tone, just trying to add in where all the snow's landing and falling into these areas. The rocks are quite large at the top of our wall, so they can take up a little bit more space. So with the rad brush, it will work really nicely in the small gaps in a second between our leaves, etc., that are growing on the wall. But here at the very top, it's quite an obvious big shape that we kind of need to fill it with a kind of foundation level of snow almost. So let's just carry on with a few more in some of these areas. Might want to go a bit smaller now, just to detail it a bit more. And again, get back in there, layer it on top so you end up with some really nice bright tone. Maybe even go to a 2 to 3% and really fade out the snow if you want. If you want that really nice sort of white feathery look to it almost. You've got like a nice variation between the 1 all the way up to the option of a large 2%, because the percentages actually have multiple sizes within them, so you can fine tune it to exactly what it is you need. Now look at that, that's looking lovely. We've got some awesome snow on there. I think that's good. I think the only other thing I need to look for now is other areas that I think maybe I could just blanket in a little bit of white and then go from there. I don't want to make these ones too heavy down here, because these ones I feel like they are a bit too far away from the top of our design, and I kind of want a bit of a top-down lighting almost. But we'll wiggle it through some of the rocky edges that have a little bit of blue on it. That's fine. And again, we'll do the same on the opposite side. Look at how that's coming together. I love it. I love it. It's awesome to see this part of the design. So 1 to 2%. Now I know this tutorial is actually starting to take a bit of a longer duration, but we've got a few different elements in here to build up, and sometimes it's fun to take your time, build up all the process. You can imagine how long it takes me to draw it in my spare time, because this is not the first time I've drawn it. This will be the second, maybe even third time I've drawn it. And so this is even longer for me. Lovely. So add in some snow. By the way, that's something, for example, we've spoken about on the sketch wave. It's like the differences in our processes, the differences in how long it takes us to come up with an idea, how long we sort of plan it, and then the process we go through of selecting colors maybe from reference photos and so on. So there's lots of different things we try to cover, and we're going to try and cover, you know, as much of everything as we can that sort of fits this world of Procreate. Let's bring the brush size down a tiny bit. But we're getting there, we're slowly getting there, filling up the catalogue of all the different conversations. The guests are fantastic. We hear their stories and everything that they have done in their journey, their art education and so on. Now, at this point, I'm just going to quickly add in a little bit on those rocky edges again that I think just need a little bit more white attention on there. Just really light though, I don't want to overdo it because we've got our detail to add in, which I'm going to do now. So I'm going to switch my brush back to the rad brush. So it's vintage, rad brush, opacity 60%, and we'll get through it. I'm going to start on the left though, because that's where we finished off. So I'm going to set my brush size. What did we set it to? 4%. And we're just going to run through all of those lines that we created with this lovely little bit of texture in here. And it just looks great on top of here. Build up the color, don't forget. You do have the option to tap a few times because we're at a low opacity. You have the option to build up more and more tone in here. And you can really go to town just randomly patching in some of your snow in here. Now take your time and try and focus it more on the top areas of your kind of bundles of any bits of green that you see, and just build up the color, get back through some of the white tone up here and just add in some texture through it so that it's not too soft airbrushy and it has a good amount. I'm trying to focus it more so towards the top of the wall with all of these kind of levels of detail here now. So I'm just going to run through here, little scribble, literally scribbling through. Occasionally I'll pick up like a new ledge that I think actually that could probably do with some color on there. A couple of patches on the rock, like a little couple of patches like here will look great. It's like it's just like frosted almost, just caught on top of the block of the stone there. Let's keep going. So again, we've got quite a lot of area here to cover, so we're just going to keep making our way through it. We're just going to look for all of those bluey areas we created before, and just a quick bit of texture on the top of it, over the top of that light grey blue that we created before. We'll just give it that final effect. Again, a couple of areas here where you can build up the texture. Here, I think I could definitely get away with building in some texture here too. And keep it nice and light on the edges. Lower your opacity if you think it's getting a little bit too bright and bold. You can then have even more control and set some snowy areas. So again, random allocation if you can, just scattering it all over the place. Keep it nice and light towards the bottom. Again, I would urge you to probably sort of pack it out a bit more towards the top of the scene. Build up on top of all of them. Maybe set the brush size to like a 3%, vary up the size. It's totally up to you. I really love this aesthetic. I think it looks really nice and frosty, wintry, bit chilly. I know from my friends on the opposite side of the earth, I do apologize. You're enjoying some sunshine while we're freezing. But I can only draw what I'm inspired by around me. And currently this is the vibe. Not quite so snowy though, but definitely that kind of cool, colder, wintry day. So let's go ahead and just maybe pack out an area over here with a little bit more texture on it. Like maybe I'll add in quite a large frosty area there. I want to take a look at my design. I'm taking a look and thinking, is a little bit too much of it top surface level? Can I wiggle and tap in a bit more in the actual body of all the green in there? Can I get into some of the gaps and also tap away too? So just take your time building up something like that left hand side, and then let's repeat that on the opposite side. So again, we just get back through all the large ones at the very top. I don't want to make the brush size too much bigger, so I'm just going to take my time now to kind of frost in some detail here. I'm just wiggling my pen over all of it. Just adding in a level of frost, like a little bit here. These really light patches with my pressure, and then press really firm if you want some really defined texture, but really light levels of texture. You can run them all over the top of some of them. A little bit more frost on some of these areas here. Look nice. Leave your dark spots though. Try not to overlap them too much. Again, nice little level of frost towards the top. Nice little random allocation. I wonder what I've got to have put a tally on here by now, surely, of how many times I've said that. Anyway, we'll keep going. Wiggling through. I've got a whole playlist on my channel as well if you're enjoying the kind of wintry aesthetic to all of my tutorials. I have a playlist literally on the front page of my channel at the minute, so if you want to go ahead and check out even more Procreate tutorials in that same kind of style, they're all available over there. Christmas tree designs, more to come throughout the whole of the month, obviously depending on when you're watching this, of course, but throughout the whole of the month of December and November as well, we'll have some more wintry. I want to sort of pack out that playlist a little bit more, adding in more and more of my winter themed content before we start to get back into the summer. So looking at that, that's come together nicely. A little bit more frost, I think, up in this top right corner, I reckon, like the sort of angle of the rocks allows it just to all flow down. I think we'll get a few more scribbles down here, adding in little light areas of texture. I don't want to add too much down there, especially. I don't want it to be too bright and like eye-catching, because potentially I'll even tone that one down later on. But all in all, I think that gives off exactly the impression I want it to, and I think we're good to carry on with the rest of the design. So before we finish up with the wall, there's two things we need to do. I want to go back down to this layer here that we created, sorry, this one here, which had all the dark lines on it. I want to go to that layer. I want to go back to my brush. I want to go back into the option of materials and the Glover brush. I want to go high opacity, very low brush size. And now that I've got everything in play in terms of my snow, etc., what I want to now do is if I go to my colors and I grab the color in the bottom left of the palette, I want to now be able to run my pen through some of the rocks and in the darkest of spaces to create kind of cracks and breaks and little random scuffs of actual very crispy detail as such. Now, what you can also do is kind of run like kind of vertical lines down and through some of them as well to create additional kind of rocky like shapes. So it looks quite minimal, but we're looking for things like this where maybe we can start to create like a bit of a crack in there and like a bit of more sort of scrape and texture and detail. And because we've got, as I mentioned, everything else in play now, all of the things that would cover up otherwise, now you just focus on, well, if I've got a few little gaps, I can add in some detail. And to be honest, I don't think I'm going to be able to get away with doing too much on this left-hand side. It's just an extra little level like these ones here that I think look amazing. Just keeps it nice and crispy. And then potentially you could even grab the middle of the first column again, bring that size down to 1%, even smaller, and then just along the edges of them, add in this kind of like little highlight, so kind of the underside of a crack, just like a little bit along that line to really emphasize the kind of cracky detail in there. So like a little sort of scuff and then a little bit of light catching on one of the breaks. So that's up to you. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. If it's too sort of eye-catching, keep it to a minimum. Again, we'll do the same though on the opposite side. So we'll switch our color back to the bottom left of the palette, 1%, and then seeing where you can actually go, right, I'm going to run a line here. You can press really lightly though, and of course, you know, even bring your opacity down if you want to and fade out some of the cracks in here. But if you've got nice areas that you can just run in some detail, it'll look amazing. You know, like a little break across the rock there, a little something like that, little random scuffle, something like that, little dashes, little right across it. You've got to make the sound effects sometimes. That gives me a lot of Bob Ross vibes, that one there. Just running across here. A couple of deep grooves in here. Really building that up, running across the surface of this rock, because that one looks great. I'm going to run in here, up there, to also separate them all a bit more. If I've got a large one, like up here, I can maybe introduce like a bit of a crack in there. You don't want to do too many of the cracks and breaks in there, but like little scuffs and little something like that will look great. And again, switch your color back to the middle of the first column, even smaller brush size, just to maybe look for some of those scratches and say, actually, I'll add in a little bit on here. I'll add in a little bit there. I'm going to leave that. That all looks fine. I'm going to add in a little bit along that one, a little bit on there. And I think that's all I want to do. The ones at the top there, I think we've got too much of a defined set of shapes up here. Maybe just define that edge a bit more. But all in all, we're completely done with the wall textures. We just have to add in a bit of a kind of gradient towards the bottom of the design now. So what we're going to do is we're going to go above all of our layers right to the top. So your wall is done. You can collapse that down, you can tap on it, you can even flatten it, but I urge you to keep it if you can. Again, in case you want to add more green, more snow, etc. So I'm going to go right to the top of my layers and create a new layer. I'm going to go to my colors and I'm going to grab the middle of the far right column. I'm going to set my brush to airbrushing and the soft brush and maximum opacity, good size to it, around about say 30% is fine. As long as you zoom all the way out, I just want you to create like a bit of a curved nature in the bottom left and the bottom right of your design, kind of fading in this kind of blue tone in the bottom edges, keeping it nice and light. A little bit of a light push up the wall as well. I kind of want a bit of a vignette to my design. So we've got a nice little bit of blue towards the bottom of the scene. Now it's time to start detailing the actual post box in the center. So we're going to go to this block shape here that we created. We'll create a new layer in front of it. We'll tap on it and we will clipping mask it to it. We'll swipe from left to right on the mask, the layer and the new layer. Group them together and we will rename that group and we will call it bricks because that's going to be our brickwork. Now on this empty layer here, we're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab the middle of the fifth column. We're going to go to our brush. We're going to go to industrial and we're going to use the stone wall brush. Now we're going to go ahead and tap away. We could have used it in the background, but that's not really the point on the wall. We wanted to actually do it. Now we're going to draw in some of this up and down the edges here. Now we do not need to match it up to our sort of grooves that we created in our design. We do not need to do that at all. We're just trying to give a light coat of texture through here. Random patches with additional color will look great. So like little taps like this, not too bold, but build it up. Take your time to build it up and it will look great. Random little bits of color. Then also go to your colors and grab the bottom of the fifth column. It will match up exactly the same in terms of the texture, but now you can just lightly just patch away in here. Maybe even go like a slightly smaller brush size, like a 7% now, and just randomly patch in some other tones in the bricks. So like we've got little random other areas of tone and hue and change and brightness. So a little something like this. I think you could probably get away with even more, but just see what else you can make up with your bricks. Maybe on the edges, maybe a little bit more color, maybe even like a scrape or two, seeing what you think looks good, but ultimately something like that. The other thing we then want to do is grab the base tone top of the fifth column and go underneath there, nice and dark, underneath there. Then maybe a couple of taps also right towards the edge though. So like you don't want to do it right along like in a block, but just keep a random little bit of darkness in here as well. So a couple of little dark tones in there to again vary up the bricks, different hues, different brightnesses, everything in between. It's a little something like this. Now what we'll also do is on this layer, we'll go to our brushing and the soft brush. Same color, so it's the top of the column, this one here. We may even introduce a slightly darker tone, but we're going to set that nice and small, around about 2 to 3%. Again, we want to make sure that's nice and dark under here. And I'll tell you what, we'll switch it just to this color here. It's the top of the fourth column from the right. I want it to blend in a little bit up there. So just a light little bit of shadow underneath the top of our surface there. I'm going to bring the brush size down to like a 2 or 3%. And just down the edge of the post box, a little bit of a shadow along there. And a little bit down the right side too. Keeping it nice and light. I'm drawing mainly underneath the actual post box and then a little bit of a feathered out little shadow at the very bottom there as well. So we've got a nice little bit of texture happening in our design as well as lighting and shadows. Now at this point we also now need to draw in the sort of grout and concrete in between the bricks. So we're going to go ahead and create a new layer. We are going to go to our layer and tap on it and clipping mask it. We'll go to our colors. We're going to grab the color here, top of the sixth column now. Your brush wants to go back into textures, materials. We'll go back into materials. We'll grab the glover. We'll set the opacity to about 80% to start with, and the size is going to be nice and small. What we want to do is we want to look for these gaps in our brick. So I'm going to go to a 1 to 2%. And in the gaps, I'm going to go ahead and draw in a little bit of sort of separation between the bricks. Now, hopefully your line matches up to say the top surface here. If it doesn't, try and sort of lower it a little bit in the middle so that you don't have to draw bricks in here. And then all of these horizontal lines, just draw it in. Random thicknesses will look amazing here. So you're looking for the grooves that you created on the side, and now just taking a look where you see the little indentation, drawing in a horizontal line in there. Again, random levels of pressure will look great, and different sort of thicknesses as well. Keep some nice and bold, some nice and thin. You want that nice, again, variation. Let's set that a little bit larger, give it a nice little bit of a coat over the top. You will need to do, of course, both sides, but for now we'll just keep going all the way up and down here. We're going to lower the opacity in a minute and also add in a shadow. And then somewhat towards the bottom, we're just going to kind of get bored, basically. We're going to ignore all of that content down there. So I'm going to start back up here and fade it out at the bottom, because we're not too interested in kind of detailing the very bottom area of our design. We want to make sure that we are just detailing the areas that matter. So zooming out, taking a look, they've got nice variation to either side. They've also got a nice level of kind of horizontal alignment as well, that some of them are quite horizontal in shape, some of them are a little bit more angular, and I love that. So once you get sort of down towards the bottom of the post box, grab your eraser, tap on your eraser and use the soft airbrush, and then maybe just kind of just lightly fade out these grooves here in the bricks. I'm not interested in detailing the bottom area down here at all. Now what we'll do is we'll go to our layer, we'll swipe it to the left and we will duplicate it. Then we'll go ahead and tap on the bottom one out the two. We'll tap on it and we will invert it so it's now black. We'll go to our cursor, and all you need to do is actually just add in a shadow. So we're going to zoom out to the point where you can see the top up here. If you tap 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then tap away, you should then have a bit of a dark tone above your white tone. So you've got this kind of like bluish tone here. Now that blue is kind of a little bit too colorful for me. So I'm going to go ahead and tap on the layer. I'm going to alpha lock it. I'm going to go to my colors and grab the dark tone here, top of the fourth column from the right. I'm going to go back to the layer, tap on it, and I'll fill it. So now we end up with this really nice shadow drop down in our bricks, and they're so much more defined now. Also, I think the light lines that we created a second ago, you can tap on these and bring them down. I brought them down in my practices quite low, and I brought them down to like around about 50%, because I don't think that they need to be super bright and white. They just need to have that kind of bit more worn, aged look to it, but at least you get that lovely separation in the bricks. Now we're going to go ahead and move just to this top layer here. We're going to go to this block here. So I'm going to collapse the bricks group down. I've got this shape here. All I'm going to do for this is just tap on it and I'll alpha lock it. I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to grab these colors in this column here. So I'm going to grab the darkest tone, that's the top of the fifth column. My brush is set to still Glover under materials. Opacity is 80-ish%. I've got 4 to 5% brush size. First of all, we just want to run some texture through here, patching it in. I want this to be nice and aged. You could even literally leave it like almost like this and show that it's like just a white topper here, but it's actually over time just worn. And then we're going to go ahead and go to our colors. I'm going to grab the middle of the fifth column. Brush size wants to be a bit smaller now, around about 3%, and just lightly run your way through here and kind of just fade out that dark tone so it's a little bit browner towards the top. Now you may want to actually switch this then to the one above again. So it's the D, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce it, this one here. We're going to go ahead, same opacity as we had before, 61%, size around about 3%, and now just layer it on top, because you should have a little bit of texture from the previous brush, but it's just here as a little bit of a extra layer on top. Then go to your colors, grab the bottom of the same column, bottom now of the fifth column, and then we just want to go ahead and just lightly patch in some additional tones on the edges and a little bit more through there as well. A little bit along there. Patching it in, creating this nice sort of just aged surface to it. A little bit on the bottom edge as well, just so I can get rid of the white a little bit more. There we go. You should end up with a nice sort of brick-like topper to it. Let's add some snow to it. Similar fashion as we did before. We'll create a new layer. We'll go to our colors and we'll grab the blue in the middle of the top of the second column from the right. Your brush wants to be set to airbrushing and the soft brush. Size, we'll go 2% to start with, why not? And I'll build it up slowly with the pressure sensitivity. So I'm just going to wiggle in a massive amount of snow just topped on top of here. Lovely. And I can occasionally leave like a little bit of the kind of stone to show through, but you just want to build up a nice surface here with the blue. You can bring it down the edges if you want to. In a minute, we'll add in the rad brush in the same way, so you can add in the frosted effect, but just a big bulky bit of blue at the top with a light little fade out of the blue at the bottom as well. So it's a very faint blue, but it is blue. Let's go to our colors then. We'll grab the white in the middle of the second column from the right. Let's bring the opacity down to say 50 to 60%. Size, still 2%. I'm going to go over the top of that, and now you're going to define the top edge by pressing quite firm on that top edge, almost like with your soft airbrush, but then just kind of fade it down. Again, it's a large area, so we're following the same philosophy that we had to do here, where we add in this white tone to start with, blanketing the snow on the very top, but not quite go into that kind of 100% opacity on the color. I want to have a little bit of space in a minute to just say, right, I'm going to use that rad brush again and add in some texture. So we've got a nice bit of snow on the very top there. I think potentially I could probably wiggle that along here and maybe lower it a bit more. A couple of light sort of patches in the stone will look good, like it's catching. And then let's do that. Let's go back to our rad brush, so vintage and rad. We've got the brush set to 60% opacity and size set to 4. And then we're just going to run our way through here. And occasionally you'll add in some lovely flaky texture. Of course, you'll have seen from the finished design that we've actually got driven snow that's actually going to be falling. So I think this kind of flakiness actually does look quite nice, because it's almost like it's literally just landed. I think if we were to not have the driven snow, which is optional at the end, you can decide if you want to do it or not. But I think if we didn't have it, then maybe we would have some softer snow here where the wind has maybe softened it out a little bit and we've lost all of the ones that were kind of hanging on. So I'm just now frosting over a little bit here with a 5% brush size, just frosting along the edge. I might even add in a bit of white tone towards the very edge here. Just frosting it, adding in this level of texture through the whole of it. It just looks so icy and cold. Lovely. And again, I just want to triple check that I've got areas up here that are slightly different variations to each other. Like here, I could probably add in like a large area in the middle. There we go. I could cut across some of those blue tones as well. With just a light little sort of bit of frost on there. Lovely. So we've got a little bit of snow on the very top now. Now, just like before, if you want to, you could add a drop shadow underneath there. You could tap on the base shape, for example. Go to your colors and grab the top of the 5th column. Go to your brush and go to airbrushing and the soft brush. And 2% brush size, same opacity we had before, about 60%. You could get in there and just add in a bit of a kind of drop shadow to some, and some is really important, to some of the areas of snow which you think maybe are mounding up a little bit more. Keep it really, really light though. I wouldn't add in too much. Just little areas of light shadow underneath some of that snow. Now it's time to go ahead and detail the actual post box itself. So let's go ahead and we'll grab all of these 3 layers here for the underside, the side profile of the block and the snow, group them together, and we'll call it topper. We'll rename the group and call it topper. We'll collapse the group down. We're going to go to the red layer for our post box. We're going to go ahead and create a new layer in front of it. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab the red at the very bottom of that column. So bottom of the 4th column. I need my brush to be set to the soft airbrush. I want maximum opacity, very small brush size, around about 1%. And I want to go ahead and draw in some groove lines here for the actual design of the post box. So I've gone to a 1%. I'm going to draw in a line down here. Now I do need that to be a nice straight and quite sharp line. So I'm going to hold down, pop one finger on the screen. It's got to run all the way into the corner. And then I need to basically create a rectangle all the way across. So I'm going to pop one finger on the screen as well to make sure it's nice and horizontal. I'm going to draw in another vertical line up the screen, up towards that corner. It doesn't have to match up perfectly. I can always move it in a second anyway. And I can just draw across there as well. Link them together. That's fine for a minute. Let's just grab our cursor. Let's move it into the center so it hits the orange line in the center. Again, you want snapping turned on. And I just need to use freeform just to make it a tiny bit wider and a tiny bit taller, because those grooves need to sit right up against kind of the edge. You want to be like a good sort of parallel gap all the way around. Then we're going to utilize that exact same layer again by swiping it to the left and duplicating it. Grab your cursor, use freeform. We want to go ahead and flatten it down at the top, bring it in on the sides a little bit. Bring it in on the bottom a little bit more. So we want to bring it up a tiny bit higher. So I'm going to move mine into the center. I'll show you it in a second. I'll tap on my cursor. So you can see now we've got a bit more of a bigger gap between the edge profile and then the actual one in the middle. Then I'm going to go to my layers again, swipe it to the left again, duplicate that, grab my cursor once again. And now I'm going to really bring this down. I'm going to bring it down to around about, say, here. Squeeze it inwards again with a little bit more of a gap. So these are all kind of like the 3D like embossing and like different grooves to the actual post box and the design of it. And then I'm going to make it a little bit higher at the bottom and tap on my cursor when I'm done. So that is my third one in there. And then from there, we can actually go ahead and pinch these all together onto one layer. So they are nicely saved. We can then also go ahead and potentially even darken these up. So you can tap on the layer and alpha lock it. You can go to your colors. We can go ahead and grab a nice dark tone. So we can grab the color here, top of the fourth column from the right, with the soft airbrush around about 4 to 5%, just very lightly sort of add in random areas of slight sort of variation of darkness. So like just a little bit uneven in their texture and surface, a little bit more towards the bottom edge, but a little bit darker in certain areas. We'll just add in a nice randomness to it. Let's add in some highlight here. So we're actually going to go ahead and go to the layer below. So the base shape, create a new layer. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab this pinkish tone in the middle of the fourth column. And we're going to go ahead with the soft airbrush. Again, 1% probably do it. We want to add in a little bit of lighting. So what I want to do is I want to get nice and small. I want to go ahead here, add in a nice bright line. So I'm going to pop a finger on the screen, add in that little bit of an indentation into the actual postbox design. Here where it's sticking out, we can go ahead and brighten up the top surface by drawing in a straight line, putting one finger on the screen, and you'll end up with this kind of embossing kind of look to it. What we then want to go ahead and do is add in texture to the actual postbox itself. So we're going to go ahead and go to our layers. We're going to tap on the box itself, tap on it and alpha lock it so we can't paint outside of it. We're going to go to our colors and grab the bottom of the fourth column again. Brush wants to be set now to the option of industrial and heavy metal. Maximum opacity. Size can be set to something fairly large. You can go up to around about 10%. You can just run your pen up and around it into different areas. Don't forget to run into the middle as well. That's perfectly fine. Up towards the top. Keep it kind of faint. You can always jump back to the base color though, can't you? But just like some random patches of darkness, maybe a little bit towards the top surface maybe. And then we're going to go ahead and go to our colors. Going to grab the middle of the fourth column. And then in the center here, I'm going to go up and down, adding in a bit of a lighter stretch there in the center. So just a nice wiggle left to right in the center, brightening up the center point of it. And then we'll also go ahead and bring our brush size down to something really, really small, like a 1 or 2%. And then maybe we'll just brighten up the very bottom edge down here. Very bottom edge. We're talking just a few pixels here. So where we've got the dark layer here, potentially we could go ahead and also add in again a little bit of a brighter tone here, keeping it nice and light. I wanted that one to be nice and bright, but these ones here can be a really subtle in comparison. Just a little bit of indentation again. Let's go ahead and add in the actual section here to add in the actual post box to put it through. So we'll go ahead and go to our layers. I am going to create a new layer. I'm going to go to my colors and I'll grab first of all the dark tone at the bottom of the fourth column. Go to my brush. I'm going to go to airbrushing, soft brush. Size can be set to nice and small. I want to use a soft brush because I don't want a perfect rectangle like the selection tool might use. So I'm going to go ahead and draw in a line across, a line up, pop one finger on the screen every single time just to make sure it's nice and straight. So we're just creating a rectangle. I wanted rounded corners. That's why I've used a soft airbrush in comparison to, say, the selection tool. I'll drag and drop the color in. Now I must have a tiny gap somewhere along here. So I'll just go into the corners, triple checking it's all nicely aligned, and drag and drop the color in like so. There we go. Then I'll go ahead and tap on this layer. I will alpha lock it. I'll go to my colors and I will grab the top of the fourth column from the right. Soft airbrush still, 2% brush size, just in the middle now, just kind of darken it in this area here. So just a little bit darker as it makes its way into the actual body of the actual inside area of the post box. Then what we're going to do is we're going to introduce some more shapes on the highlight layer above. So on the highlight layer above, we're going to go to our colors and grab this middle color again in the middle of the fourth column. Soft airbrush still around about 1 to 2%. I want to go ahead and go over the top here and going slightly wider than the rectangle we created, but evenly on either side. And then from there, you can go ahead and kind of draw in a bit of a diagonal line here, because usually they have these kind of sort of outward pointing bits here. And I think it's to prevent people from getting their hands in potentially. And then it sticks outward. So we're just going to highlight that. And then lightly, just above the line, try and just color it in, but fade it out towards the top. So it doesn't want to be, it wants to be kind of a rectangular shape, but obviously pointed inwards at the top, and then fade out at the very top, like it blends and rolls back into the shape of the post box, so the flat surface. So I'm just brightening that up along there. Lovely. Zooming out, it now looks like it sticks out towards us a little bit more. Let's go ahead and add in some more highlight down the left edge as well. I'm going to set that to 1 to 2%. I'm going to go behind this line here. So I'm going to start with a 1 to 2%. Again, I just need it to be the right size to start with. I'm going to draw in a straight line and let that go all the way down to the bottom. Just adding in a bit of color there. I can always fade this out in a second if it's too bright. And I'm actually going to go ahead and just brighten up this area here as well. Straight line across. Just kind of fade it out on the ends, but really kind of adding in some good chunk of color here. I might even go across it even more, just to show kind of downward lighting, etc. This little line on the very outside, we have to do the same. So I'm going to go ahead and get right down into here. And I need to be just behind the line. Pop one finger on the screen. I actually need to be a little bit larger on the brush size and do that again. I'm going to go all the way across. Lovely. So we're just trying to create all these like levels and sort of grooves and whatnot to it. And again, we'll go up the side profile as well, up towards the top, which I'll probably fade out in a second. That's a little bit too bright for me. I could do a tiny little one up the edge here, but and I mean, it would need to be tiny. So I'm going to go 1% up this side here, pop one finger on the screen. I'm going to go up this edge here, popping one finger on the screen, all the way up. So it's just literally like 1 or 2 pixels. That's lovely. Now I'm going to grab my eraser, soft airbrush still. I'm going to set the size down to like I need to be very small because I need to avoid this area here. So I'm just going to go ahead and set that down to like a 4% brush size of eraser and just fade that down that side a bit more. And then at the top up here, also fade that out as well, just so it's got a little bit less color towards that top edge. We also need to go ahead and go back to my brush. We need to go into like the bottom edge here of the post box itself. So 1%, I'm going to add in a little bit of a lip across there too. Lovely. And I'm just going to brighten that one up below that as well. A little bit more of a larger, chunkier bit of color there. I think that looks cool. And I'll reflect that in the bottom as well. So just going back over a few of those lines because I just need to chunk them out a little bit more basically. Let's then go ahead and start to add in the sort of features at the top here, because the first part would be the day of collection. So I'm going to go ahead and go above all of the layers in this group and create a new layer. Now I say in this group just above our postbox. I will swipe from left to right on everything there for the postbox and group it together. We'll rename the group. We'll call it postbox. Then on this layer, we're going to go ahead and go to our colors. We're going to grab this color here, top of the 6th column. We're going to keep the soft airbrush around about that 1 to 2% again, depending on what you want to do. And in the center, we need to draw in a square. So I'm going to draw in, first of all, like roughly where I need it. So I'm going to pop a finger on the screen. I'm going to go ahead then and draw across. And again, popping one finger on the screen. Don't matter if it's not actually square, that's fine. You can make it a bit taller though, just to try and make it a bit squarer, that's fine. And drag and drop the color in. So you've got a little tag there. I'm going to go ahead while we're here, just simply tap on the layer and alpha lock it. I'm going to go to my colors and grab a white tone here, the middle of the 4th column from the right. Keep it nice and light with your pressure, but like a 2% in the center, just kind of circular motion, just kind of brighten up the center point here. Then we're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab a little bit of a darker tone now. So I'm going to grab the top left of the palette, bring the size down again to that 1%. And we just need to draw in the kind of outer area here that connects it all together. So I'm going to tap on the layer, turn off the alpha lock, and now I'm going to draw in a line that runs down the edge. I'm going to draw a line that runs down the bottom edge. I'm going to draw a line up the side as well. So what this is, it's like a little bit of metal on the outside, and they slip these in and out. This actually slides up and out, and then you can have a little bit of context as to when it's next going to be collected. We're then going to go ahead and go to our colors. So we'll go to our color. We'll grab a white tone again, the middle of the fourth column from the right. Get that brush size nice and small, 1%. I'm going to zoom in, and then on the bottom edge here, I'm going to draw in a straight line across. Lovely. And I'm going to do a very light tone down the inside here, just to kind of show this kind of metal clip as such. Lovely. And then I'm going to leave it like that. I'm not going to put a collection day. You're more than welcome to put fry or chew, whatever you want to put there. I'm going to go ahead though and add a shadow underneath it. So I need to go ahead and tap on the layer below, create a new layer, go to my colors. I'm going to go ahead and I'll grab the red first of all, the bottom of the fourth column. Brush wants to be around about 1 to 2%. I'm just going to shadow underneath it, mainly towards the bottom side, and a little bit of shadow there like so. Now we've got the tag. Now the next part of this is actually adding in the cipher that goes on the front. Now if you're not from the UK, the cipher is the king or queen's logo essentially that goes onto the front. Now if I show you on screen now, the one in my village says GR, just for King George, but Queen Elizabeth for me was the queen that was part of my lifetime anyway, from the moment I was born to only a couple of years ago. So I'm going to do the Queen Elizabeth one on the front. You can put whatever cipher you want on here, and you can see the ones on screen now, for example, as reference to some of the previous ones, and also King Charles's, which is the latest one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go to my colors. I'm going to start with the red in the top of the fourth column. I'm going to make sure I'm in the Postbox group. It doesn't matter where. Just going to go to my actions. I'm going to go to add. I'm going to add text. And I'm going to double tap on the text. And I'll get this little menu. I want to tap on keyboard. And if it doesn't pop up for you, just tap on here. Go show keyboard. And I need an E and an R. Now I'm not going to perfectly match the cipher, but I'm going to go E and R. Double tap on both. I can change the color just to white so you can see. So double tap on the text. I'm going to go to the font. And I think Dye Dot does a pretty good job of sort of giving us that kind of aesthetic, but I think any one of the other kind of classical looking fonts will also do the trick. So I'll go to Charter, for example. I'll just use that one. I'll grab my cursor and I'll just scale up the text because it doesn't matter when it's text. You can make it whatever size you want. Now I just need to go ahead and double tap on the text itself. So I'm going to tap on my cursor again, double tap on the text, and I just need to go to here. So once I get this full menu up here, I can just go ahead and expand the tracking just so I've got enough of a space to put the two eyes in the middle and hit done. So I'll do that. I'll grab my cursor and I'll just kind of move them quite centrally. And then I'll go ahead and go to my actions. I'll go to add text again and I'll shift them up, go eye. I'll grab my cursor. I'll just scale that down and put it into here. Now, if I put it into kind of the middle of my design, I can better off just kind of fit around that. So I can go back to the E and the R. I can tap on it, I can edit text, you can also do it that way as well. I can double tap on them, grab my options here, and I can just bring the tracking back down. Now I may need to just keep jumping between that, but to be honest, that actually is quite close. I might need to go just a tiny bit smaller with the tracking. So this is just something around about 5, I think, 5.1 looks pretty good. And then I'll move that to there. Lovely. So let's go ahead and just move that up the tiniest little bit. And there we go. So what I'll do is I'll pinch the two layers together. That will then change it from a text layer to a regular layer. We'll then tap on the layer, we'll alpha lock it. We'll go to our colors. We'll grab the red at the top of the fourth column. We'll go back to the layer, tap on it and fill it. Then what we want to go ahead and do is while we are alpha locked, we'll go to our colors. We'll grab the light tone here. It's the middle of the fourth column. Brush wants to be set to soft airbrush, nice and small, 1% again. We want to brighten up the top edges. So we kind of want to come along here, brighten this up with quite a good amount of color. We might even switch it to a white tone in a minute. So I'm just going to go along the edges that face upwards. So just like along the straight edges that face upwards, a little something like this, along the eye, lovely. And again, maybe a little bit in those corners here. Don't have to do absolutely everywhere. You don't have to force it basically. The bottom of the R. We'll go along the top edge here, nice and bright, and then wrap that around onto the side. Any inside edges, of course, as well. Got the R. A little bit on there too. Awesome. So that's a little bit of a shadow, a little bit of a highlight, should I say. I can always switch my color to say the white in the middle of the fourth column, or just white in general, and very lightly just emphasize some of the edges if you think you want to do that. So just a little bit of extra white on them. Then I'm going to go ahead and go to the layer below, which we've already got a shadow for this little sort of pocket here for the day. I'm going to stay on that layer. I'm going to go to my colors and grab the bottom of the fourth column. And then from there, we'll go ahead and shadow the underside of there too, adding in a nice little recessed, well, sorry, it's also actually the opposite of recessed. It's sort of, it sticks upwards. So we're just shadowing now underneath any of the flat surfaces, just shadowing under them. And then it should give you a nice 3D look to it. A little bit under there too. I'll do a little bit under there, a little bit under there too. Just taking a look that I've not missed anything. I can scoop a shadow underneath here, for example, and I'll scoop it kind of down that edge, just a little bit in there too. The eyes, I think I might need to sort of bring the brush size down to like a 1% and just triple check I can get like a bit of a shadow running underneath these. Not super firm. I don't want to make them too dark, but a little bit of a shadow just to kind of give them a little bit more depth. And then we should have the cipher now on the front of your postbox and looking nice and detailed. Now at this point, we just want to add some driven snow. Let's turn off our drawing guide. We don't need that on anymore, so we'll turn that off. I'm going to go to my layers. I'm going to collapse the postbox down, go right to the very top of my layers and create a new layer. I'll go to my colors and let's grab the middle of the second column from the right. Brush wants to be the option of elements and driven snow. And I always have three sizes. I've got 13, 44, and maximum 100. We start with 44. We have our middle size to start with. And we're going to just scoop some snow into all the empty blank space here. Now, I will take a bit of an artistic liberty and avoid adding too much driven snow over the top of things that I don't want the driven snow in front of. I don't want too much of it in front of my postbox. I don't want too much of it in front of my wall because I'm happy with the texture. I'm somewhat just going to focus it towards the top. I'll go to my brush size, set it to 100%, add in some really nice large ones in here as well, so they're a bit closer towards us. Lovely. And then I'll set the brush size to the smaller size of 13% and just dash in a few little specks of small snow in the gaps. Light pressure, heavy pressure, everything in between. So just adding in some nice little bits of snow. We could add in a few here as well if you really want to, because they're quite small. They shouldn't sort of take away from the design too much. Now you can leave it like that, or you can go to your adjustments. You can go to the option of motion blur, and you can drag down. So in a vertical fashion, just to show it falling. You can do it a bit of an angle, which I actually quite like the look of, to say like a sort of 15% motion blur at a diagonal angle. It makes it a little bit more blurry, and then that sort of gives you more focus then again on the rest of your scene. Now I'm going to tap on my adjustments when I'm done, and I've got my little bit of snow. I'm also going to go ahead and add in some final areas of snow, as well as just fixing up a little bit of the vignette. So now we've got our background all done. We can go back to this layer here and then go to our colors and grab the middle of the far right column. And now start to emphasize that again. So I'm going to go back to my soft airbrush under airbrushing. Set the size up to something around about, say, 23%. I'm just going to bring in a little bit more color, fading that round, making sure the colors in the top edges are really nice and dark, and then just fading that round into these edges. I'm also going to go ahead and go to my background. Even if you've compressed it onto one layer, it's fine. We're just going to create a new layer. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab this yellow tone at the bottom of the third column from the right. I'm going to set the size, I think, to around about sort of 27%. Now on the layer, we actually want to change the blend mode from normal to the option of add. We will lower the opacity down in a second. I just want to go round in a circular motion just here behind the post box almost, and go round in a circular motion to brighten it up. Now potentially you might like it exactly how I've just done it there. Leave it. But you may want to go ahead and change the opacity higher or lower depending on your pressure sensitivity and how hard you pressed. But ultimately that's exactly what we want. We want that nice bright bit of colour coming from behind. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in some final touches of snow as well elsewhere. So in the Postbox group, I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer. I'll go to my color. I'm going to grab the middle of the second column from the right. Brush wants to go back to the option of vintage and the rad brush. Keep the same opacity, 60%, size 6%, if not smaller in a minute, because we've only got small ledges to drop this onto. So about 3%. I'm going to run my pen along these grooves of the postbox and seeing if any snow would catch there. I could even make the brush size a bit bigger. I think about 3%. I could mound it up in a certain area, but leave the rest. You know, I can just frost it up a little bit, add in some little areas of detail on there, and go ahead and also add in like a little bit of snow on top of the cipher as well. So I can bring the brush size down 2%, a little bit on the top edge of the letters I think would look quite cute. I'll leave that on there. We'll add in a little bit more on there too. I think I'll set the brush size to a little bit higher now, opacity, sorry, about sort of 80, just to add in some fine bits of snow now, because I'm right at the very end. I'll add in 2% on top of the lid here, the sort of mouth of the post box, and I will add like a 4%, just a light little bit of frosting on there as well. A nice good amount of snow landing on there, look great. A little bit along that line edge. You don't want it trickling over the edge at the bottom though, like I showed a second ago. And then we'll also go ahead and add in some on the edges here of our stone. So again, I'll go down to 60%. I'll set the size to 3. I'm just going to go along some of the bricks there, just adding in a little bit of extra snow along those brick edges. So these are like final touches. I always like to leave them in because these are the things I'm looking for, and maybe they're the things that you should also look for in your work. And like little lines like that show that the brick is not perfect. You don't have to do every single brick. You can leave a gap and then maybe do like a really bright one above it where the snow really is catching and landing on there. That'll look great, give you some nice variety. Little bits of speck, and then a little bit of frost along some of them as well, just like little random avenues to show that, again, the surface of the brick's not completely flat. Towards the very top though, you kind of want to leave it because it's not going to gather there too much. Add in a bit more on this one, I think. Kind of pack this one in. I think this is going to be the one that gets the most attention, so that's there. I'll put a bit more in this one too, and then I'll do the same on the opposite side. So just a light coat across them, little sort of areas of brighter tone though, just to vary them up from one another. A little bit towards the top, not too much because the top lid area there would cover it up. Let's go along there. A little bit along there too. And towards the bottom, maybe I could get a bit more adventurous and add in like a few that have got quite a lot of snow on because it's a little bit lower. Maybe it has got enough time and space to actually catch and land on there. But I think other than that, I don't want to sort of allude now any further down to the snow landing on those edges because I think, again, we haven't drawn all of the edges. We don't necessarily need to. Slightly larger brush size just to give everything a little bit of a light coat of frosting. Little wiggle along there. Look at that. Very quick and easy. Very quick wiggle. That's looking lovely. And I think, to be honest, we could probably do a very, very light wiggle as well along, say, the bottom of your post box. Add in some additional areas of just gather and snow. If the snow is going at different angles, then maybe we can add in some snow in the gaps here. Really, really, really light. Just a little bit of frosting almost on everything. And then when you're done, you can pinch with 2 fingers, you can go full screen with 4, and you end up with today's finished design. So I hope you enjoyed this pretty lengthy tutorial, but it is a fun one. It's a fun one for me, and I think the theme of it is nice and on point for Christmas. So as always, make sure to tag me in your finished creations wherever you decide to share them, and subscribe to the channel for weekly Procreate tutorials. But if you want even more tutorials from me, you can come and join me over on Patreon. I've been posting 3 exclusive tutorials every single month to my Patreon supporters, and the catalogue sits at well over 120 exclusive tutorials exclusive to my patrons. You can have your name featured in videos, early access to videos, and much, much more. So check out my Patreon in the description down below. And if you like this video here on YouTube, you will love this one on the screen now. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day and a wonderful Christmas if I don't see you then. And with all that said, I'll see you in the next one.